This week we're talking about ethics in our class. As you go along in the counseling program, you will have other classes that will talk about ethics more in depth and dig into ethical dilemmas, ethical decision making, the various codes of ethics that you will encounter in the profession. This week, one of the things that you will have to review is several different codes of ethics. In counseling, as you read the textbook, as you study ethics, you will see that there are a number of codes of ethics that pertain to counseling or are relevant for counseling. Our primary code that we use in counseling is the American Counseling Association, or the ACA Code of Ethics. Also, the National Board for Counseling, the National Board for Certified Counselors, has a code of ethics. Many states, for example, in my state of South Carolina, Texas, they have an additional code of ethics for licensed counselors or licensed professionals in the state. Some states have adopted the American Counseling Association as their code of ethics. And so they follow the ACA code of ethics as their state code as well. So one of the things you will want to do, whether you're practicing in Texas, another state, you will want to make sure that you understand what the codes of ethics or a code of ethics may be for that particular jurisdiction, because they do vary. That is one of the concerns and one of the difficulties in the counseling profession, is that there's so many codes that are out there to determine actually which code do I follow, which code is important. You will also see in the chapter in the textbook that you're assigned this week that there is a code of ethics for the American Association of Christian Counselors as well. And so that is very important for us, I think, to consider as we look at counseling from a Christian perspective or a Christian worldview as well. One of the dilemmas that I really want to hit on this week are things that you will face is so often secular perspectives of counseling collide with the values and beliefs of Christians. And sometimes they are diametrically opposed to what we believe and standards and beliefs that we hold or values that we hold as Christians. And so as you go through this in the program, you're going to be exposed to where these dilemmas, where these differences exist. And while we can't cover all of those or address all of those in this class, at least I want you to think about that. So that goes back for me to this question that I asked this in the previous class. And that is, as we counsel from a Christian perspective, are we doing something different? I mentioned, I think you can be a Christian, and I think you can be a counselor or a psychologist or a social worker. So I think that's a valuable way to do things. People who work, as I kind of do myself, in a secular setting, you can't be particularly specifically evangelical or talk about God always. So for many people who are in the counseling profession, we are going to be working in secular settings where being overtly Christian or dealing specifically with issues of the Christian faith may not be allowed, or at least may put you in a situation where you have to be very careful with that and navigating that. So in that respect, I say that people can be very Christian, bring their Christian worldview, bring their love, their compassion, their caring for people into the setting, but essentially you're just doing the same things that any other counselor would do in terms of theories and practice and interventions. So they really don't look any different. An EMDR therapist does EMDR. They don't do Christian EMDR. They don't do Christian CBT. They simply are people who do the same things. EMDR is not a Christian therapy model. For example, I use a lot of EMDR, and EMDR is just a theoretical model, an intervention model, particularly for trauma, and is very effective in working with trauma. So I use that. There's not a Christian model for it. So as a Christian, though, I hope I bring a sense of compassion, love, caring in a certain way as I'm working with the children in my school and their families. So that is important. However, as we talked in the previous discussion, is Christian counseling something different? And I do believe it is. And as you go through this curriculum that we have at B.H. Carroll for our counseling program, I hope you will begin to kind of think about that and process that. Do you learn some of the same techniques? Our theories textbook that we're using in this class it covers the same theories and information that you would cover at the University of Texas or the University of North Texas or any other counseling program around the country. But it obviously is written by our author to address the Christian perspective, or to weigh out in Christian thought how these theories kind of fit or not, or how they align with the Christian beliefs or not. So we see that in our textbook, and that is particular for us. But the real question is Christian counseling actually something that you do differently? And I do hold that it is. That when we sit in the room and we are actually practicing, we are working with somebody, then not only are we just being a Christian in the room with a client, but actually what we're going to do is very different. And Dr. Tan actually addresses that in the chapters that we have read in terms of what looks different, what is different about Christian counseling. Also, that talks about or brings up the idea of integration. So how do we integrate counseling theory with actual practice? And those are kinds of things that you'll talk about as well in the curriculum. But today, I kind of want to hit on the same question. So what do we do as people who bring a Christian worldview into the counseling office? As we're sitting with a client, we're working with people. And specifically, if we are doing something differently as a counselor that is really bringing to bear the Christian faith as we're counseling, because I do believe that is different. It's very different than just being a Christian who has a Christian worldview, but who is just a counselor like anybody else that you could find anywhere else down the street in a counseling center. So what is different about it? And we will kind of work through those things. But this week, as we talk about ethics, then what does that mean for us ethically? Because if you look at secular codes of ethics like that of the American Psychological Association, the Code of Conduct for Psychologists, the American Counseling Association Code of Ethics for Counselors, the AAMFT Code for Marriage and Family Therapists, or the Social Work Code, or any of these codes, you will see very often that there are things that are prescribed ethically for counselors to do or not do that I think really are in opposition to the Christian faith. And I want to enumerate those, but as you go through this, you're going to have to think about that. So this week, as we talk about ethics, we look at ethics, the thing I want you to really consider for our class is, how are ethics different? And how do ethics come to bear on us who work to counsel from a particular perspective, a counseling perspective, and the things that we will do differently in the room with our clients? May we use CBT? Yes. Bible says, as a person thinks, so they are. That smacks of cognitive thinking and processing. Um, People who are traumatized and caring and love. But how do we do that differently? Or as we're thinking about this ethically, particularly where I think it creates dilemmas for us who are people of faith, how do we look at sin? For example, if a couple comes to you for counseling and one of them is having an affair, um, most secular models of counseling might say, well, that's not very healthy for your marriage if you really want to have a good marriage. One or the other having an affair or a breach of uh, uh, trust in that relationship is probably not going to work very well for you. But for Christians, we believe in the sanctity of marriage. And so, how do we look at that differently? If a person says, well, I want to have this way of life and that way of life, for example, in secular counseling, you will hear people talk about non monogamous marriages or relationships, meaning that you can expand your intimacy beyond just the husband and wife in a relationship, or polyamorism. Or polyamorous relationships where people invite folks into the intimacy of their marriage from outside their marriage and are perfectly fine with that. And actually, there are groups and places where you can go to practice and learn about that. And so that's a very real thing. For us as counselors, though, I think we would look at it in a biblical manner and we would say, but that's a violation of Scripture. That violates what God says is the sanctity of marriage. Ethically, you would say, well, you come with that, and that's what you want to be. Then, according to the ACA Code of Ethics, you would have to say, hey, that's your choice. I support that. I acknowledge that. And I affirm that for you. That's your choice. For us as Christians, it's very different. So those are the kind of dilemmas that I want us to think about this week, because we will face them. If we truly stand with Scripture, if we truly follow the admonitions and the teachings of Scripture, then there are going to be places where professionally we're going to run up against those conflicts, because beliefs as a Christian, beliefs in what we bring to the counseling relationship, truly as someone doing something different in Christian counseling and in how we practice, that's going to be very different. So that's what I want you to think about this week, and the discussion questions will kind of relate to that in terms of where do you see these dilemmas arising, these conflicts, how you would deal with them. So while we can't deal with all the nuances of ethics in just a 1 week piece of our course, I do want to kind of get you to think about this week as you process that and as you are answering the discussion questions, because these dilemmas are going to be there. They're going to be, for sure, things that you will have to address, and they're not always easy answers. One of the bottom lines in ethics most of the time is that there are not a lot of do's and don'ts in the codes of ethics. They're guidelines. They're sometimes very vague kind of explanations of how to do things. So the codes of ethics don't always say do something this way or don't do something this way. There are a few places where it's don't do. But for the most part, our codes give us guidelines as we go through counseling, and we have to address those dilemmas. And some models. One of the things you're going to have this week is a model for ethical decision making. So primarily this week, you're going to have 2 codes. You're going to have the American Counseling Association code, and you will have the American Association of Christian Counselors codes, as well as a decision-making model. So I hope this is a good week for you as we consider this. Again, blessings to you as you think about your week as we go along this week and study.